I think actually Canadian artists are probably at an advantage that no other group of artists have. We have contributed more to the comic book business than any other subgroup that you can think of.
So it's just a matter of getting the word out to people. You know, I don't think it's a matter of whether we're Canadian or not. It's just a matter of like reaching out to our audiences, connecting with our fans, and finding new ones.
I have so many fans in Canada, and there's really nice people, so I'm having a great time here.
I think it's because it's cold up here and we like indoor sports. Drawing is an indoor sport, and you know, up until global warming happened in the last couple of years, it was cold in the winter and we needed to do something indoors.
Right now we're at the Toronto Comic Con 2016. It's the first Comic Con of the year for us, so it kickstarts the year. Last year it was a great turnout, a lot of great feedback. We met so many amazing people. It was our first time on this side as exhibitors, but we've been to Toronto Comic Con, the Fan Expo, as fans before, so this time we're on the other side of the table, but we're still fans, so we're the fans on the other side basically.
We are putting our very own piece of this big puzzle, right? So then some people, they come here with stories that they are like really horror stories or science fiction stories. Then we have our very own approach. So then every single artist around the table, these shows, or in this market, they bring and approach this Canadian market in a different way.
It's different being like a Canadian artist and publisher. For example, in Canada, especially in the Toronto area, they're much more sort of supportive and interested in like the independent type of stuff, which is what we do. We're a small press publisher, we do all original graphic novels and comics, and we get a lot of support from the community both in Toronto and in Canada for being an independent press. So,
who would you say your biggest fans are here in Canada?
I think you are, and all of you.
People get entertained with our stories. That's what we want to see. People get happy and entertained and see him walking out of our booth or walking out of the comic book store and getting that book that really like. If they are coming back and says, I love your book, then I'm just thrilled about that.
I think when you think about comic books, you think about the classic characters, you think about Superman, and I mean, you know, the real secret story of Superman is that he's a Canadian character, created by a Canadian dude and an American dude. But Metropolis is Toronto, you know, the Daily Planet is the Toronto Star, or whatever, you know, whatever your newspaper is.
Can I ask some of you, why did you come here to this panel? Its title is 75 Years of Canadian Comics. What do you want to find out about? History. History. I'm glad, because nobody wanted to find out much about Canadian comics for a long time. Richard, do you have a good definition of a Canadian comic book?
Well, I would consider a comic book that was created in Canada by Canadians, hopefully even printed here, distributed in Canada, as well as other parts of the world, but having its origin here in Canada by Canadian creators.
Buddy, you're publishing Canadian comics books, left and right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a tricky situation. Is Wolverine Canadian?
No. Deadpool, there's a rumor Deadpool's Canadian too.
There you go.
Richard, when did you become aware that there were Canadian comics? Was it when you actually made Captain Canuck for the first time?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Sorry.
So 1975.
I really started working on it in 1974, late 1974. I was not aware of Johnny Canuck. I was not aware of Orb either. So it's strange. I became aware of Orb, but I just don't remember. I think it was actually after Captain Canuck, somebody showed it to me. Captain Canuck started with me when I met Ron Leishman. And Ron and Leishman and I would get together, and that drawing there in the circle is actually my adaptation of a drawing that Ron Leishman did. And his style is very, very cartoony, and I felt we needed to make it a little more in line with the typical superhero comic books. It was Ron who suggested we should do a Canadian superhero in a Canadian comic book series. We were just talking, really, at that point, and it was about 1973 that I started seriously thinking about it, researching the distribution, the printing, the publishing, everything that would be involved. How do you make something like this work financially? And the first issue was published in 1975. It was a comic book in the comic book format. It was in full color. Well, many of you have seen that first issue. What distinguished it from the American comic books at the time was it was a little better quality in printing.
Chapter House started with Captain Canuck. I own a restaurant called the Lakeview Restaurant in Toronto. Basically what happened was it came time to do a kids menu, and so I figured, hey, what better thing to have kids color Captain Canuck. Captain Canuck was like the first comic I ever bought when I was 6 years old. So I got in touch with the creator, Richard Comley, and we started to talk, and I kind of asked him, hey, what's happening with Captain Canuck? Like it's kind of been out of the scene for quite some time, the comic book scene. So we kind of started to redevelop Captain Canuck, kind of got the license off the film, started to redevelop Captain Canuck, starting with an animated series. Kind of came time to do a comic book, and we kind of shopped it around a bit, and then kind of started to notice, hey, you know what? We kind of want to do this on our own. So we started Chapter House Comics.
How compare Toronto to other shows? It will be tough to describe in one single word because it's so diverse. That is fantastic. You see people that they show up here that they love manga. There's people that love science fiction. At the same time, you have all different kinds of readers, all different kinds of fans. So it's one of the most diverse and fantastic crowds that you could ever imagine.
He's got the passion and he's got the brains to pull it off, but you could be the smartest guy in the world and still not succeed because it's not an easy job. It's not an easy business. There's many terrific Canadian artists and upcoming terrific Canadian artists too. Getting started in illustration for comic books is tough, just like it is getting started in any of the arts. And often you're doing stuff at very low pay, and you're also initiating your own projects. You have to be very entrepreneurial, I believe.
I think definitely patriotism and pride, play into that Canadian identity in comics for sure. We have Captain Canuck, we have, Nelvana of the Northern Lights, we have, we have some great characters, the North Guard and all these other kind of subsidiary things coming from Captain Canuck. But yeah, I think the pride in our country, the landscape, the colors, our flag. All those things are worn out loud. I think in the Canadian comics for sure.
Chapter is primarily a Canadian company. We use as much Canadian talent as possible. Leonard Kirk works on Captain Canuck. He's doing Squadron Supreme right now. He's worked on Fantastic Four. Just massive talents, and it's been phenomenal. To work with all of them, to kind of get them involved, it's just been a lot of fun. Really great.
In terms of breaking in, I think I'm still breaking in because I still have a job as a janitor on the side. I'm still doing the superintendent work at a building, but to cover the rent while I make my comics.
You have to be willing to boldly go out there and be an entrepreneur and hustle. As I think of Leonard Kirk, who actually was born in the States but has lived most of his life in Canada, and he was doing work for small publications, as many other artists have been doing, and eventually as he got better, he was already very good, but as he got better, and of course Marvel and DC noticed him, and then he started getting work with them, and now, other than working for us, for Chapter House, he continues to work for Marvel.
I'm very passionate about my art, very passionate about my storyline. I met Alfonso about 5 years ago, and he took me under his wing, and I do my comics and my storyline under his studio comics, and it's been just great.
wonderful to be here, actually trying to promote some of the titles here at Studio Comics. Things like Guy with the Crystal Skull, Dark Blood, trying to make sure that everybody gets the awareness of these Canadian comics that we're doing. It's amazing. We get to interact with so many people throughout the day. So when you've got a full show that's 2-3 days, you're going to meet with literally thousands of people.
He has taken all sorts of artists from anywhere from Mexico to Portugal to Canada. He allows us all to do our art, and he lets us do our storylines, and he guides us to how the panels should look, how the art should look. He really helps us shine, like he helps us get out there and get the word out. So.
This show, actually, I'm helping out with the organization. I'm assisting with the pro guest area, helping various people like get to panels and stuff like that. The reason for that is I'm taking the year off exhibiting at most shows just to give myself time to develop my own work. Generally speaking, most of the shows tend to have their own unique feel to them. The way the shows are run tend to be very similar, and a lot of the organizers know each other, but the vibe in every city is different.
One of the biggest challenges, the United States and globally aren't as aware of the independents, so getting the word out, getting the marketing, that's one of the biggest challenges, trying to break into the other markets that are out there.
All of us, Studio Comics, and all the other people that are here want the same thing. We're all here to introduce people to our art and hopefully have them love it as much as we do.
Learning how to do your work, willing to work hard at it, and you have to love it enough to be willing to make the sacrifices.
Hi there, my name's Ty Templeton. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been in the business for about 32 years at this point. I have written and drawn the adventures of, it's faster to name the ones I haven't done than the ones I have, but it's like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, the Avengers, Howard the Duck, Mad Magazine, pretty well anyone who publishes comics I'm willing to draw and write for them. And I have a one-room schoolhouse here in the city called Ty Templeton's Comic Book Boot Camp. And what we're doing today here is... One of the things that Canadians feel about themselves is that we think of Canada as a small town, that if you live in Vancouver, you're still my neighbor, even though you're 6,000 miles away or however far you are away. That because we are a small country in the world stage, and so we have to have that sense of camaraderie with each other. There's a thing that Canadians do that no other country does. If they see a Canadian somewhere on television or in a magazine or in a comic book, they elbow the nearest person to them and go, that guy's a Canadian. And they don't do that anywhere else. Germans don't elbow each other and go, that guy's a German, because it doesn't really matter to them the same way. But to us, when we see Bill Shatner on TV, we go, that guy's a Canadian. And when we see Joe Shuster, we go, that guy's a Canadian, because it matters to us that he's from our small town. I wrote comic books before I started drawing them. Back in the 80s, I wrote independent comic books for a small publisher in Toronto called Vortex Comics. And at the time, I didn't think of myself as an artist because I wasn't that skilled, but I had a roommate, a guy named Klaus, who was really good. So all the stories I wrote for Klaus to draw, and the two of us did these projects together. And Klaus ended up making more money doing commercial storyboards, so he left comics because he wanted to make more money. So I had to teach myself to draw. So I bought a couple of books on anatomy, and I just learned it. And after a couple of years, I learned how to do it. And then Klaus wanted back in because now I was making money at it. And he sort of knocked on the door and went, can I draw them now? Because he suddenly realized it was a job. But ever since then, I've been writing and drawing them myself. And so I'm a little one-man unit. I don't really worry about who my artist is going to be or who my writer is going to be, because I'm going to do both of them if I can. So if I'm in a job interview with a new editor, I never know what he's hiring me for. When he sits down across from me, he says, I want you to be working on this new Green Lantern project or this new project. I always go, which one am I doing? Am I writing this or am I drawing this? And it's often a surprise for me which one he wants me to do. I love that I get to participate in some of these giant pop cultural projects that I work on. I love the fact that there are some people out there whose first Batman comic is one I wrote. I love that there are people out there whose Simpsons experience is something I wrote for them, because I've written about 20 or 30 issues of The Simpsons, the comic book, not the TV show. And I love the idea that there are people out there whose favorite Spider-Man comic might be one I wrote or drew, because these characters mean something to me. And when I was a kid, the people who created them meant something to me too. When I was little, Neil Adams and Jack Kirby were like gods to me, because these were the guys that gave me the Fantastic Four and Thor and Batman and Superman. So I'm very aware that I'm carrying on that tradition, and I'm not going to compare myself to Jack Kirby and Neil Adams because they're so much more skilled than I am, but I am to some extent, holding the baton for them in this big long race that we're on, that there are people out there who look at my work and go, wow, that's the guy who does Batman that I really like, or that's the guy that does Spider-Man that I really like. And I love that I'm some small, memory for people out there that read my Batman comics or my Simpsons comic or my whatever comic and think of me as one of the people who makes Batman for the world. Philosophically, I'm somewhat a Taoist, and as a Taoist, I'm not that interested in my own ego, so it's nice that people know who I am, but that's not really that important to me. It's much more important that I'm satisfied with the work I'm doing. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what my place in the history of comics is or anything like that. I just don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Making a living as a comic book artist is such a changing landscape year after year that there's no blanket statement you can make about it. When I first broke into comics in the 80s, independent comic books were just starting to become a place where you could make a living. So you had Cerebus by Dave Sim and all that stuff that was coming out of Aardvark Vanaheim and stuff like that. And I made a decent living producing a comic book called Stig's Inferno and another one called Mr. X, which I was working on with the guy who created it, named Dean Motter. And you could make a living back then in the 80s doing that. But say in the early 2000s, no, you couldn't, because the market changed dramatically. Right now, the market is again changing because you can put your comics online if they're good. If you're living in a meritocracy, enough people will read it that you can put out a collection every now and then and make a very tidy living. If you're good, it's not hard to make a living at it because the cream rises, and if you're good, it's worth doing. If you're terrible, there's no living for you because we don't need you. The thing I would say to the people trying to break in, is a harsh thing to hear, no one wants to read your story. And no one wants to hear that either, because it's a terrifying thing to think nobody's looking for the next writer or artist because we already have them. But here's the trick. I do want to read a great story, and I do want to see a great artist. We don't want you necessarily, but we want the next great one. So you have to be indispensable. You have to get so good that we will let you in. The advice I give for an up-and-coming artist in Canada is the same advice I give anybody, which is do it more, do it again, do it 2 more times, and then do it once more. Because this is not a talent, it's a skill, and you only learn your skill by doing it. The first time, LeBron James picked up a basketball, he probably wasn't as good at it as he was last week, and it's not just because he was born with a set of muscles, but he developed skill by bouncing that ball and hitting it at the backboard and dribbling it and doing everything he was supposed to. You get good at something after a few thousand hours of doing it. And anyone who expects to be good after the first 100 hours is just expecting too much. You have to keep putting the time in. I always say, the Beatles weren't great till they spent 5,000 hours on stage in Germany.
I'm the manager of Comic Book Embassy, which is the studio we're at right now. And it sort of grew out of just a need for a workplace. I was working in video games and I worked from home and I was going crazy. And about that time I saw the opportunity to partner with some other people in the city. I'd been taking night classes in comics. I spoke to some of the students and I spoke to some of the instructors and sort of said like, hey, so I jumped the gun and I found some real estate. Do you guys want to get in on that?
My work environment is very cozy, and I get to work here with my friend Megan and other friends Rachel and Nicole and a bunch of other really creative, talented people.
I've always been a storyteller, but I did go to school for animation, so I've been taught a lot through the eyes of a filmmaker, and I do think that way. And because I have that instinct, but I have not gone into animation or gone into film, comics are really the only way of creating something cinematic without needing that whole big crew behind you. You can really make sure that your vision makes it to the page, whereas when you work in film, you have a lot of people's fingers in that pie.
Yeah, it just kind of happened naturally where I've always loved to draw and I've always liked to write, and so those two things bridged together. And that became comics. Comics has been really great to help push both of those needs.
The Canadian art scene is often one that works quietly. Like Toronto is an outsourced town, so we see a lot of work coming from the States and coming from other countries that we then produce here in Canada, but that goes out into the world without the Canadian stamp on it. We tend to go to large American publishers. We tend to produce work under American brands, particularly in superhero genres. So I think that Canadian branding gets lost. We're very quiet about our identity. We're a country known for great artists, great animators, great illustrators, but we don't wear our maple leaf on our sleeve.
For me, being a Canadian artist, I suppose it's about finding your voice and trying to make it as loud as possible. In Canada, I think there's a lot of fight in trying to be heard.
Few independent artists are solely independent artists. I think most of us have some other source of income or someone supporting us or something else that makes it possible for us to be working in a creative field. When you work for yourself, you really have to be aware of every income stream, of all your scheduling. And I think it's important to be honest about that I've not just walked out into this career and I'm succeeding. I've had a lot of people working behind the scenes to make sure I can do this, and I have alternate income streams that I rely on.
In indie comics, I think we're now seeing this breath of fresh air where you don't have characters that have been around for 70 years. We have new characters and we have new representation. We have new ideas, and I think that's super important to the comic market as a whole. We are becoming a fierce competitor on that front.
No matter what field you look at, fine arts, film, there's always a very different experience that women have than men have. And I think sometimes we're not taken seriously in our concerns. I haven't heard a lot of men complaining about being harassed or badgered at conventions. I haven't seen a lot of men being pilloried online the way women often are. So I think that we're a little more conscious of how we present ourselves. We're a little more concerned with our presentation.
I think it's very earnest, the woman's voice in comics right now. I think it's growing, for sure. A lot of the time, right now, most women I think are in alternative comics or web comics, and now we're slowly getting into the mainstream comics. People like Becky Cloonan, Jordi Belair, Gail Simone, of course, Kate Leth, but like a lot of names coming up in the ranks. So now we're slowly starting to see more women's names on the front covers of books.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about, the role of women in today's society, but how that has sort of been an issue throughout time, but just taking different forms. So that was sort of a modern issue I wanted to take and reimagine in an antique setting. So that's the way that I've modernized it, rather than necessarily having them be in the modern era.
Who can say how much my gender has influenced what becomes personal for me? Like, who can really say what the social pressures on me have done to me or what I might do if I weren't a woman? I have a really supportive audience and they're lovely, and it surprised me because I thought perhaps my work would really resonate solely with women, but I have a really evenly split readership, and that surprised me. It's nice to think that my thoughts resonate with men as well as women. I have found that the female comics community is so protective and supportive. It's such a wonderful place to be. And I certainly didn't expect to find that kind of support and that kind of sisterhood in comics. It was such a great surprise.
I love Ottawa. I think I just love the amount of space at this show. The organizers of this show in Montreal are like some of my favorite people in the world. They give us comic artists a nice space and the ability to breathe, and it's great.
I was actually introduced to Montreal Comic Con back in 2008 by a friend of mine, and when she mentioned comic books and movies and things like that, I was totally interested, so I volunteered. And volunteering is actually one of the better ways to enjoy a convention like this.
A lot of cosplayers come out to the show, which is great too, because we like people to kind of show their geeky side and get involved.
Ottawa Comic Con, a lot of the Canadian Comic Cons are really focused on the Canadian artists that are coming in fruition to, whatever they're going into, whether it be prints, comic books, animation, who knows? They really focus around on that. Ottawa doesn't have a huge comic book base-wise, but it's growing massively. Toronto's starting to pick up as well, but as for company-wise, everything's mostly in the States.
Canadians, in comics, especially in the comic book industry, doesn't get its fair share of the limelight because you know, everything is either Marvel or DC. You know, it's all American companies. Canada is only slowly starting to step into that light and into the popularity. Mind you, a lot of Canadian artists and a lot of Canadian talents are recruited into the big, you know, the big three, you know, companies, and they're doing work for them. We have a very rich history in Canadian comics, and now with the reboot of Captain Canuck and all these other great Canadian characters, I think it's just there couldn't be a better time to do it.
I was a teenage kid in Montreal growing up, you know, in the typical 1970s way, but I was the comic book nerd, science fiction nerd before that was, you know, fashionable. I didn't have the happiest childhood, and I was sort of the prototypical example of the kid who grew up reading comics. It was the mid-'80s, and it was a time of a big boom in black and white publishing. And all of a sudden it became legitimate to publish comic books in black and white and to sell them yourself and not have to go through the big publishers. And the comic book stores were suddenly a market where you could sell directly to the comic book stores and not have to go through the whole mess of newsstand distribution. Northgard was the Canadian superhero I created back in the 1980s. His real name is Philip Wise, grew up in Montreal. He was the typical everyman comic book nerd who fell into this crazy circumstance where he was given the Uniband, which was this super-powered weapon system, and he developed the chance to become a superhero, but everyone thought he was crazy. It wasn't a normative thing to do, but he was given this opportunity, and the only way he could make it make sense to himself was to become a superhero. But also the bad guys in the story are a reactionary, right-wing, racist, anti-Semitic group, you know, which seemed really, really fantastic in the 1980s, but now, unfortunately, seems a lot less crazy than it did at the time. Captain Canuck already existed, and I was already friends with Richard Cumley, who created it, but I wanted to take a slightly more realistic approach to it, sort of like what Alan Moore was doing at the time in England with Marvel Man. This was before he did Watchmen, it was before Dark Knight. Take a sort of very realistic approach. You know, what would it really be like if these superhuman people existed? The nerd, the geeky, the science fiction, the comics has become mainstreamed in a way that would have been impossible to imagine 30 years ago. When I was growing up, it was still, we were the outsiders, that we were the kids people picked on and got beaten up after school because we were interested in this stuff. Now it's everywhere. When we first created Northgard, we promoted him with the line, "Canada does not believe in heroes," which is something I can't use now because it's not true anymore. You know, Canada is a lot more self-confident, oddly enough, a lot more different from the United States than we thought we'd ever be, because the Americans have gone, it's more them that have moved away from us than we've moved from them. I think there's a real strong desire for something uniquely Canadian in a way that did not exist before. I'm Canadian, I'm Jewish, I was born in a particular generation, I'm the child of a Holocaust survivor. All of these things are part of who I am, and no matter even if I try to ignore them, I can't. So I worked them all into Northgard, you know, and I made them overt. I put a big maple leaf on his chest. I did a whole story about how he had a dream about his parents being Holocaust survivors. I made those forefront. If you're Canadian, you're going to tell a particular kind of story because this is who you are. So maybe that's more true for writers than for artists who don't write their own stories, but I think your background, your upbringing, your country, your religion, your culture, it can't help but affect what you do.
This is probably my 15th or 16th Comic-Con, but it's my first time at the Montreal Comic-Con. It's awesome though.
The Comic-Con's here. I mean, Montreal is amazing. The people have been more than gracious. We're very lucky people. I was part of a cartoon that was like 20 years ago. It's amazing. It's locked in pop culture, right?
I think what makes Montreal Comic-Con stand out as opposed to like Fan Expo or even Ottawa Comic-Con or PAX in Boston is the cosplay. Montreal cosplay is through the roof. The creativity, the passion is really great.
And people search for like unique stuff. They kind of want to find the thing that I think it's why also it works really well for us here. It's because they search for something different than Marvel or like, you know, and artsy. I feel Montreal people are very
artsy.
Yeah. Well, Montreal is our main inspiration, but also because, all our weapons are designed with bicycle parts. We try to represent local people. All the people in Zyle are people that have contributed to our crowdfunding campaign, Indiegogo. So they are Montrealers, and also different iconic places and different, businesses, and we really try to make them shine.
The mandate of my company, Miscellaneum Studios, is to represent people of color, women, the LGBTQ community, and other marginalized communities in a non-stereotypical manner. There's too many negative stereotypes and tropes in media, so we figured doing our project, we want to make sure we tackle that in a good way. In other words, there are no sacrificial Negroes in Zyle.
It's a big con. It's very busy, as I think we all noticed it today. And there's a lot of people, especially French-speaking people, who aren't as acquainted with Captain Canuck as others. Although I find more French-speaking people are big fans of Captain Canuck than I imagined there would be. So Captain Canuck, I remember years ago, in the 90s, I did a signing in a store in Montreal, and there were actual young people in that store who were devout separatists, and there was tension in the air. I felt it because they looked at me like I represented the national Canada, you know what I mean? So, but I don't feel that anymore, obviously.
The nature of Montreal is friendly. Everybody watches their money right off the bat, and then later on they start to spend too much money, and they get a little crazy, and then they realize how much money they're spending, and then they have to calm down. The only comic book artists I know are Americans. As far as I know, Canadian artists come to America. They don't tell people they're Canadians, and you have to discover it. Because from that point of view, it's sort of like actors, How do you find out if an actor is a Canadian? Well, he slips up and he says the wrong word, and you go, wait a second, are you Canadian? They go, well, yeah. And then they tip their head down like this. You get embarrassed. Canadians are hidden among us.
Would you like a free comic, my friend? Thank you. Would you like a free comic? No? Free comic.
Being a Canadian, though, has been one of the most crucial decisions that I have taken in my life. For a person, for an immigrant that comes from a different country and try to do art, it was crucial for me. It was somehow difficult, but that's what Canada shows you, that nothing is impossible, though. That you can actually do it.
It's not where you come from. It has to do with whether or not you've got the ability to learn in a field of people that are constantly trying to destroy you. And that's what's happening with artists. You're surrounded by people that are destroying you. And they don't know it, they don't understand they're trying to destroy you, but that's what they're doing. Whether they're jealous or they're just plain stupid, they're destroying you. Bad advice proliferates. That's why it's so hard to get somewhere.
Comment ça va?
Very good, very good.
If you believe in your art, then you can do it. That's not the same way that you've been taught on different places, that you are different, that you are on the minority, or that you are on different points, that it doesn't fit with the description of being a Canadian. Being a Canadian is that. And for me to take that decision between being Mexican, and I'm very proud to be Mexican and being proud to be born in Mexico, but at the same time, I'm really proud to be a Canadian now. We actually leave everything behind to be here. And then now that we're here, and then we work a little bit harder to make sure that whatever we want gets done.
Okay, day 2, Montreal Comic Con. I'm pretty stressed out again. The team hasn't shown up. I just received a message this morning through the social media that apparently something is going on. I don't know right now what's going on with the rest of the guys. I'm pretty much trying to do everything here by myself. It's quite overwhelming because this is one of the big shows around this area. So it has been really good, but it's a one-man band right now. So I'm going afloat. I think that we're doing really good. People are looking for the books, but still, it's a lot of pressure right now?
Well, some of the people that they normally help me out on the shows, they didn't show up at Montreal. It was a little bit stressful to try to work everything together, like do the work for 3 people by myself.
I think it's a very tough business, and all things told. When you're independent, you're doing it on your own ultimately, right? You know, there's a lot of talented people out there. That's one thing I've seen going and doing these conventions worldwide. There is a lot of talent. However, you have to know also how to promote your talent, which is the big thing. Like, you can be the best pen and ink artist out there, but if you don't know how to shake hands and talk to people, that is going to separate you from the pack. It's a tough thing, but I think when people do something for the love, it's not for the money, and you never fail when you're kind of chasing your dreams. So
you're not giving up, right? Like,
I'm not giving up. Yeah, no, at the end of the day, I'm not giving up. I've been doing this for like 19 years. I'm not giving up. It's not that I'm stubborn. It's because I have a commitment. I really want to pass the word around of what we're doing. It's not just me. It's the word of 15 different artists that they are here. In its essence. So then we have to do it. If it's not me, somebody else will do it. But until somebody else comes and takes me out of the place that I am right now, I'll do it. And it's really important for me to demonstrate, like not demonstrate, but pass the word around that we are actually building a strong community of comic book writers and creators. And if the main person who is building that or who is putting that together, that I'm here organizing the show, and I don't have a strong team to show them that we can actually do this, how can I go around and show the rest of the people that we are actually that new generation of comic books that we're building? I'm not bending. I'm not stepping back. I'm keep moving forward. Yeah.
Well, it's nice that you're giving them away. Yeah.
Well, like if somebody has to do it though. Somebody has to give them away. Somebody has to create awareness of the Canadian icons. So that's what we're trying to do. How are you? Okay. So, you ready? Or what?
Yeah, ready, willing.
Rock and roll. So the goal for the weekend is to clear everything out. Everything is for sale. Take the chairs too. Come on. Take the chairs. So today, after a long wait, we're finally showing up, Niagara Falls Comic Con, so it's gonna be fun. It's one of my favorite shows, to be honest. Yeah, we've been preparing this show like almost for a year now, and then, well, make sure that we have new stuff, because people, when you come to these type of shows, people, they really want to see what's new. It is fun to see how from one single comic book, everything starts like spreading out, and then you have now new stuff coming into the table, and new artists creating new artwork. That's fun.
It is my home show. I have been part of this since its inception, even when it was before it was officially Niagara Falls Comic Con. So, you know, I have to be here.
It's a great place to meet artists, to talk to people, to check out all kinds of stuff you didn't even know existed. And just really, you want people to go away with a fun experience, fun memories, and maybe they pick up a few items here and there that they can remember the show by.
Since I filmed my television show, Relic Hunter in Toronto, I get a lot of love from Canadians, so my heart is here, definitely.
So the interesting thing is, even though I'm American born, I've lived in Canada for 45 years. So most people think I am Canadian, and I might as well be. I sort of think of myself as half and half in a way. The fun thing about Canada is, in terms of content or creators, people across the entire country feel unified as a group of creators. If you go to the US, like, well, you got the New York crowd, or you got the Southern crowd, or every city has their own small bunch. But Canada seems to be everybody's very inclusive.
This is a big deal for me, folks, because the first vacation I ever took in my life was to Niagara Falls. My parents took me and my brother and sister here in 1975. So I was a kid, I was 5 years old, I was born in 1970. 1975, they tell us we're going to visit another country. And I was like, wow, okay, how are we gonna do that? And they said, we're gonna drive there. And I thought for a minute we had Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the flying car. But they brought us here, and this was like astounding because my father was like, come here, look at this wall. And it was a wall full of pictures of people who'd gone into barrels and hurled themselves over Niagara Falls. So he's like, see these people, see this barrel? People would put themselves in the barrels and go over the falls. And I'm like, why? And he's like, because they're Canadian. So it captured my imagination because I was like, oh my God, did they live? And he's like, they all died. Like, you know, and that lights a kid on fire, like, they died? Like the House of the Dead and shit like that.
And it's been fun doing conventions across the country, so you do get that sense of unity. And in terms of getting work, from American publishers, to me it makes no difference.
I'm officially not yours today. Destroy your panel. I know you're shooting B-roll, so I'm going to wreck it. Want to see what to wreck it! Sketches, it's right there. Yeah. Based on the doctor, yeah. I am supporting Alfonso. I'll give him his 1 cigarette break a day, as you do in prison, you know. It's actually part of my community service. So I'm supposed to help him out do stuff, you know. I want to try and take the time off, right? Because I want to get out of jail quickly.
I've been doing comics since around 2004. Started with independent, with my own series based on The Wizard of Oz. It was called Dorothy Gale Journey to Oz. It was a dark and modern retelling of the story. From there, I've done a bunch of other things, mainly in the horror genre, ghost stories, but I've also got to do some historical stories. I've got to do things with autobiographical stories, science fiction, kids comics, fairy tales, pretty much everything except for superhero comics. When I initially started doing comic cons, it was a very different environment for independent artists and people trying to get their work out there. At that time, so this is back in 2005, it was more about people trying to get the word out about their own projects and things like that. Over the years, it's sort of changed, like the focus of the conventions, or at least artists attending them, has gone more from promoting their books to just selling artwork, you know, third-party characters that they don't own, like the fan art stuff. It's easier to sell established characters than your own stuff. It's sort of become a bit of a crutch for a lot of artists. So nowadays, because it's become so widespread, you get a lot more people doing the fan art than actually promoting their own books. So people promoting their own books has become more of a rarity. The prices are going up for shows. Tables have been, you know, basically doubled from when I started doing it 10 years ago. So when you're setting up, I mean, while it's cool to have your own book out there and have your own characters and stories that you're representing, but you're putting months and months into a book and spending thousands of dollars printing it, and you bring it to a show and it becomes a little bit demoralizing when no one's buying that. And then one day you decide, oh hey, you know what, other people are doing it and they're not getting in trouble, so I'm gonna do a picture of Spider-Man. And then suddenly you sell more pictures of Spider-Man than you have the books, and the profit margins. You know, you've paid a couple bucks a print, sold it for $10, made $8 on it, whereas your cost on your book is about $2.50 and you're selling it for $5. Why am I busting my ass working on this book and putting so much effort into it? People aren't appreciating it, and I can make more money this way. And furthermore, no one is stopping me. It has been tough though with regards to getting people to notice, or to rather invest in books as opposed to individual pieces of artwork. And that's when the temptation comes in, when you're doing the shows, to focus more on the pieces of artwork versus creating stories and characters, which is what I got into this for the first place.
Shane Kirschenblatt, we were talking about a fantastic painter, hand-painted the cover to Mark Twain's Niagara, which is beautiful work. You don't see a lot of hand-painted artwork these days. And we have Ty Templeton, who was able to do artwork in the book. He did a 5-page story featuring the Underground Railroad. Claude St. Aubin did an 8-page story featuring Mark Twain, who's been caught in the middle of the Battle of Lundy's Lane in Niagara-on-the-Lake, meeting the character who ends up
being the basis for the ghost story that's in the old Angel Inn, who haunts the inn to this day. And we're looking to get other people excited. Ontario Tourism and the City of Niagara Falls are already behind the book. They are going to help promote and translate it to overseas market to help get tourism to the Niagara region, because the whole book is based on Mark Twain in Canada. So we have that commitment from them, and we just need to get the project done.
One of the greatest books that inspired me to really get into comics and graphic novels is it was a Batman comic. My parents had taken me to a comic book shop, and the cover art was Batman holding the second Robin who had been shot, and Batman's crying and he's saying please help him to Dr. Leslie Tompkins, and the whole book was just about Batman kind of reliving how he sort of started this journey with the second Robin and all the drama that came with it. There was no action, there were no villains in it. It was just a really deep, sad story. And even as a kid, that's something that really touched me, and that's something that has stood out. And that's sort of what led me into sort of pursuing and reading more graphic novels as opposed to comics. I mean, I always loved reading comics, Spider-Man, Avengers, everything. But it's really sort of Batman had those storylines, and graphic novels are really a lot more, drama. You can get dark, you can get more humor, you can get violent, but sort of the real facts of life that's where they're at, and that's kind of why I love that side of it. Well, the history of Age Comics started with Titan and Alternate History, and having my own publishing company was actually never something that I had originally pursued doing it, because I was working full-time as a graphic designer. I thought, this is what I'm going to do. But I illustrated a full 100-page graphic novel written by a friend of mine, Michael Tim Chisholm, and we basically incorporated AH Comics, named after the book, just so when we brought the book to bookstores who may want to buy copies to sell, we looked like we weren't just a couple of guys with a comic book, which they see all the time. Turned out it worked, because it got bought by a couple of stores. The National Post named it the best book of 2011 of the best graphic novels. And so we just kind of went from there and started. Every book that I wrote or illustrated or produced was under the Age Comics banner, and now 6 years later, multiple award-winning publications that are sold all over the world. Most of the shows that I've attended with AH Comics has been in Toronto and Niagara Falls, and it's just such a great community feel. We have probably one of the most robust and best Artist Alley sections. And that's the main draw that I see a lot of people are coming go to. People want to see the independent publishers. They want to see the independent artists. I think there's a strong voice in Canada. We've got Auric of the North, and we've got Captain Canuck, and I don't think that they make as big a splash in the US as they do in Canada. So I mean, we've got a great Canadian culture in comics here in Canada, for sure. There's a much more diverse culture and community here in Canada that people can take advantage of. There's different niches and different stories to be told from a Canadian perspective, which makes a big impact when readers from around the world are reading. It's more exciting, and it's things that you don't always see from the mainstream in the US.
Alfonso is one of our art course instructors, and about 4 years ago, Alfonso said, Sandra, I have a fantastic idea. Let's grow this from just an art course to a festival.
My role at CCAF is the organizer and co-chair of the show. This is our 4th year running the show, and then of course the preparation and the communication between Studio Comics, my team, and IdeaChimp was crucial to make sure that everything comes together.
I'll be honest with you, compared to the first time I've been here, you can see it's really picked up a lot. It's really picked up a lot. More people seem to be more interested in it.
I'm enjoying it. It's a unique experience. It's different, and by that I mean in a good way, because you get to interact with people more so than the big cons where it seems like everybody's in a rush, whereas in this kind of environment, you get to know the people.
If you are an artist who is starting in this market, then you want to find a place where to put your work. If you approach one of those big shows, you are going to be paying a fortune for space. And some of these guys, they don't even know how to start setting up. Or some of them, they know, but they don't want to pay for it, right? So then we're trying to offer that space to showcase independent artists. This is not a Comic-Con. This is not a fan expo. This is a show dedicated for the artists. We're trying to bring the artists together to create that real community within the Canadian artist.
I really am enjoying it. It's pretty relaxed. Everyone's been really friendly. Everyone who's come around has been really enthusiastic, which is nice to see. And I'm really just enjoying seeing all the other artists as well.
Hi, my name is Tommy Campbell, and I am a comic artist. I do all my work on my computer, like the drawing, the coloring. It's all done on my computer, which takes a long time for me to write. My passion is I love what I do.
It's a free event, which is a big plus on the cost side. Another thing I like about this event compared to other conventional Comic-Cons is that you get a lot more everyday folk here rather than people who are, all about the fan art or into superhero fantasy. So it's kind of nice being an event like this where you get everyday people who care more about literacy and literature and just stories, which is more about what my comic is about, rather than being based on superheroes that they already know and love. So for independent artists, I think this is a great event, and I would hope there would be more available across Ontario and Canada.
Every comic artist that is here brings a different style, and we showcase that style for them. We encourage our community to come, to participate, and to really learn. A lot of the artists are creating right here at their tables.
Working with Idea Exchange for me has been 10 years. It's pretty cool because Idea Exchange for me, it's like it's my second home. And they were the first group of people that actually believe in me. They believe on what I'm doing, and this is the result, right? 10 years later, here we are, and I'm pretty happy. Well, Cambridge Comics Arts Festival was fantastic this year. So, Fan Expo, here we go.
Fan Expo 2016 is going to be a really exciting show. As far as I know, this is the last mentioned show that Stan Lee is going to be presenting in Canada. So we're pretty excited to be part of the show.
Well, I'm going to say one thing, and nobody can stop me. You are the greatest fans in the whole world.
Stan Lee, obviously his last time here in Canada, although will it actually be his last time here in Canada?
That's true.
But yeah, so got a couple things signed from him, and just the overall atmosphere, seeing everybody dressed up, seeing firing. Fun things like that.
It's been quite the ride, to be honest. But yeah, this is a big step for us, so it's great that we're out with the fans.
It makes it more authentic, right?
Yeah,
and it's more proud.
Best part of this whole ride so far, and one that I didn't even expect coming, was just how much I enjoyed the interaction with other fans. Like, there's so many fans out there, fandom for anything, like we talk about obviously comic books, we talk about the artists, we talk about how it impacted their lives, we talk about movies, about like animated live action things.
Games.
It's always the fans, I think I have the best, most wonderful life in the world. I get to do the work that I absolutely love to do, play these characters that are so close to my heart that I love, and then to come out and meet fans, it's the greatest thing, because you can be an electrician or a plumber, you spend your whole life, nobody says to you, hey, wow, thanks so much for that plug in the kitchen. It always kept my eye on it at night and always had toast in the morning. But you know, you do something that you love to do, like acting, and people go, oh my gosh, you're the voice of my childhood, you know. And it's been 26 years from me now doing the voice of Mario. Meeting fans is like, it's the greatest.
When I think about Canadian artists in this business, in comics, what I don't think of is that we have a style. What I think of is that if there's one thing that's across the board, it's that we're all very distinctive in our styles. We're all very different from each other, and also different from other artists in general. The fact that we're spread across all the provinces and all from different walks of life and different environments has led to a very unique, strong identity. I think it's amazing.
This year has been lots of fun. Again, this is a really, really big con for Canada, and it's been hectic. It's been tiring, but honestly, it's so much fun. I love coming every year. I'm Toronto-based, so it's really great for me to be able to stay in my area and do a con like this. I always look forward to Fan Expo Toronto just because it allows me to be able to see everyone that I know, and obviously new faces, old faces that have traveled in.
Things are going great. We're sitting here at the Fan Expo in Toronto on day 3. Busy is about the best word to use here, and I think I've seen 600 Harley Quinn costumes in the last. In fact, there's literally one behind you now.
Man, I got to see Charlie Cox. That was nice. I got to touch the Cox. Yeah. And yeah, it's just such a big event, especially with the amount of celebrities that come. So there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of excitement. And I see that when I walk around and I see other people that are just really excited in general. So it's good. It's like good vibe, lots of positivity, and it's just fun.
Every Canadian artist deserves highlighting because the frozen north is where the best comics are made. I suppose we can highlight the fact that it's the last time Stan Lee is going to be in Toronto, and I believe it's the last time Adam West and Burt Ward are going to be together. So if you were born like I was in the 60s and you care about pop culture, what are you not here? Why aren't you here? Oh, wait a minute, this is a documentary. It's already over. Yeah, you missed it. It's too late.
All right, let's stop kidding around and let's start kidding around. So here's the big question, Stan. Are we having a great time here or not? It's adequate, it's all right. Of course we're having a great time. This is Toronto, isn't it? Where else would I travel 3,000, maybe 4,000 miles to do a panel but in Toronto, huh? Yeah, I left sunny Los Angeles and I come to sunnier Toronto. This is wonderful.
I started out in Artist Alley, and the last 3 Fan Expos I've moved out to a pro comp table, which has been really nice. Since I started out, I was just doing fan art. Now I've moved on to my own books. I've moved on to anthologies, having those books for sale, which has been really nice. And making more of a push with my own creative work and moving away from fan art.
We've been having a great time, lots of sales, lots of people, lots of fans, lots of artists.
It's been a whirlwind, but yeah, so far so good. We are jammed. It's Saturday in the middle of the day, so we're like at peak humans right now.
Back in 2011 was our first year. We had just 1 book, and every year since then we've produced another book or 2. Now we have 6 and upgraded to a premium end cap space, and we're doing fantastic.
Maybe a miracle is taking place. I'm getting my hearing back. Anyway, I followed just everything I did. I love doing comics. I gotta tell you, I love the comic strip format. I love the idea of reading what the people are saying and looking at what they're doing at the same time. I'm a big name dropper, so I'll tell you that one day I was talking to Steven Spielberg. And he said to me, you know, Stan, you and I do pretty much the same thing, except my pictures move. And I thought that was a real nice thing to say, and very true. Now, a lot of people have said, I don't know, I don't think it's a good thing to read comics, because you should have to use your imagination. You shouldn't see what's happening in the drawing. But if they think of that, take Shakespeare. He was not a bad writer, they tell me. if you go to see a Shakespeare play, and he wrote, everything he wrote was for a play. You see the actors, you hear what they say, and you also see what they're doing on the stage. So nobody ever says, now, I wouldn't go see a Shakespeare play because you see the actors doing it. And it's the same with comics, are just like reading Shakespeare. As a doing for you.
I want to take a quick story that we met a guy earlier today that kind of touched him and touched me and kind of made me think about myself. We were having breakfast and the guy comes up and tells us, hey Stan, I just want to take a minute of your time and tell you something. And we said, okay. We figured it's going to be the typical, I love you, you're the greatest man in the world, blah, 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 blah. But it was different. The guy says, he goes, I grew up without a father. My father died when I was young, so I never had a father figure. And growing up, everybody wants to have a father in their life, good or bad. But the guy never had one. So growing up, he read his books. And at night, he would go to sleep reading these books, thinking in his head that it's actually Stan reading to him.
Decided I would write Stan a letter because that way I could put it in print and maybe he would read it. I didn't for a second think that he would let me come up on stage and read it to him in front of the audience, but that's what happened, and it was amazing.
You look forward, it's 15 pages.
Dear Stan, I'm only just meeting you, and yet I've known you my entire life. As the quietest child of 4 boys, I was often ignored, so I like to tell people I was raised by Uncle Ben and Aunt May, because most of my morals come from them. To me, with great power comes great responsibility isn't just a catchphrase, it's a moral imperative. 10 years ago, that way of life was tested when I witnessed a girl attempting to commit suicide by jumping off a bridge. In less than a second, I found myself instinctually leaping over the railing to grab her, and there I was hanging on to both the girl and the bridge for dear life in what seemed more like a comic book struggle. I wasn't strong enough to pull her up, but I stubbornly refused to let go. And we waited there for what seemed like hours until finally somebody else came. And that girl is still alive today, and all because I believed in 6 words that you wrote in the comic book 50 years ago.
Well,
I guess what I'm trying to say is thanks for raising me up to be the man who would react quickly enough to make a difference in someone's life. Because you've made a big difference in mine. Even with the words in hand, I still stuttered a bit. I was shaking. It was an incredible experience to be able to tell Stan how I felt about him and how I appreciated what he's done for me.
it's hard to believe sometimes that these characters have meant apparently a lot to a lot of people. And it makes me feel so, I don't know the word, humble or so grateful or so, I can't believe that I was just trying to write stories to make a living. And some of those stories really meant something to people. So you can imagine what a feeling it is. It's a wonderful feeling. I keep telling my wife about it, but she says, if you tell me about another case where your stories help somebody else.
Like I said, I don't think I would have done that had I not been raised by Stan Lee's wise words.
You know what would make a great story? He ends up marrying her. But that is incredible.
You should write that. Fan Expo for Studio Comics for myself. It represents the end of the comic book year and the beginning of this new comic book year. That day when we finally take all our stuff down and then we go home, or at least I go home, it represents like starting off a new comic book year and start up the whole thing all over again. Preparations, the new books, the new schedule, it begins to see what you did right and what you did wrong throughout the year. And I want to say that for us, it has been a fantastic year. We have the chance to keep publishing our work. People seem really interested in what we do. As a team, we find our good corners and bad things in regards of like how much we can achieve as a team and how important is every single member of my team. I'm pretty grateful. But the most important thing is like a family. We also are a family, right? We are fathers, we are husbands, wives. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. We have to be aware that this is our life.
Well, actually, I think all of the characters at Marvel touch the core or try to. Every one of them should represent something, some good quality that would make you feel better about or make you try to have for yourself when you read the stories. You know, superhero stories are really like fairy tales. When you're very young, you read fairy tales, and they have witches and dragons and goblins and things like that. But they always have a little moral at the end of the story. And I used to think that our superhero stories are a lot like that. They're fairy tales for grown-ups, for people who are older, who are too old to read fairy tales. But it's the same thing. You have people with special powers who can do special things, and you have to be careful to write those stories so that they inspire people rather than make them go the other way. The hero has to be somebody who'd make you feel that maybe there is justice in life, and maybe there is an important mission for all of us, including me as you read the story. And I forgot what I was leading up to. I didn't mean to make such a long speech, but I hope that's in response to what you said.
Yes, thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Herbie, of course, was a member of the Fantastic Four in the 80s.
Do you know why he was a member of the Fantastic Four?
Oh, I love it. Here we go.
Because when they created the Fantastic Four series for CBS in the morning, an executive at CBS said, "We don't want one of the characters setting themselves on fire. A child might try that." That was the actual reason.
So was Johnny not on the team?
Johnny never appeared in the CBS version of Fantastic Four. There was an executive who was genuinely, it was called imitative violence, that he did not want to see a child go, "That looks like fun, get out the lighter fluid, Dad." And the idea that a child would set themselves on fire after seeing Johnny Storm, if that kid died, that's evolution. You want them to die before they reproduce. That's why they're doing it that way.
That's fair, that's fair.
So you guys, I want to know one thing before we kind of like wrap up this meeting. I want to know, you guys, what do you think that could be improved for this show, for this weekend? Any ideas? Any suggestions that could be like improvement? What do we need?
Your accent?
My accent. Okay. Working on it.
Oh, I'm an artist and I'm in Canada, I guess. Gotta watch out for those blizzards. Dodge moose. That's a big problem. Mill my own paper. No.
So we're photo opping?
Yeah, we're photo opping.
What do we photo op? What is that?
They're both part of the same film.
This is as artificial as it gets.
Yeah, I know. Here, I'll make it even more artificial. I'm gonna get you guys.
Don't go, please. No. Okay. You see, I told you to start.
It's your bad comedy.
It's my bad comedy.
This is what happened under Days of Confused.
Oh my God. So in early today, that was a...
My name is Shane Kirshman. See, I can't even get through the name. Yeah.
And I did come across one guy's sketchbook where the theme of it, you see a lot of sketchbooks with themes, which is really fun. And the theme of this sketchbook was he asked every single person to draw the Invisible Woman from the Fantastic Four. And I just handed him the book back. And he didn't get it.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here for another great episode of Heroes Manufacturers Live. This is a very special episode. We're actually doing a little bit of a reunion today. It's not like our typical episodes. We're actually going to include some of the past cast of the Heroes Manufactured film shot back in 2016. Myself as the producer and co-producer and director of the original project. But also, we do have on the show today Andy Stanley, Shane Kirschenblatt, and our new host Philip Moran from the Heroes Manufactured Creators Unleashed show. So I'm going to introduce everyone. We're just going to get right into it right now, guys. And there we go. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey everybody.
Good to see you guys. That's awesome. Everyone's got great internet connection, so that's awesome. Yeah. Well, listen, guys. Like it's been some time, and I know with the two of you, Andy and Shane, we've been working on Heroes way back since 2016, and we had a lot of personable moments shared at your homes, but also at conventions, and just following you guys in the routine of your work. How has it been? I mean, since the original kind of construction of this film, of the documentary. We'll start with maybe Andy first, since Andy, this is your first time on the show. I'd love for you to kind of start and just tell us how it's been since you've been since Heroes and all that.
Since Heroes, wow! Since the film kind of came out, or since we started, way back in.
I would even say, way back. I mean, since then,
oh boy,
what you've done since I guess the chronology of the movie from what we shot of you.
Right. Oh, okay. Well, we've AH Comics has grown quite a bit. I think back in 2016 we were still working on Moonshot, the Indigenous Comics collection, which has since blown up. We've got 3 volumes now. We've got 2 volumes of the Jewish Comics Anthology. We've got Mark Twain's Niagara. We've got a bunch of other things. So, professionally, Age Comics has grown. It's been great. I love checking in with you and Shane, and I get, and Shane and I have had the opportunity to work together several times, which has been wonderful. So it's nice that we've kind of kept this little family together.
And I mean, this is like an image here I always like to show from the original movie with Andy at AH Comics, and I mean, this was back in like 2016 the movie was released. So I mean, with the Jewish Comics Anthology, I know you had the first volume back then, and have you had a second volume since?
Oh yeah, we had Psy, the Jewish Comics collection, which is basically the Jewish Comics Anthology Volume 2. So we called it.
And Shane, did you work on some of that as well, like originally?
I worked on both volumes actually. 2 very different stories. One was more of a horror folktale, and then the other was more of a comedic kind of sci-fi slice of life story. So yeah, very fun experience.
Awesome. That's awesome. And and I mean, we'll kind of get into more of the questions. I know, Andy, we're going to have you next week also on the show, which will be awesome as a one-on-one with you. But with Shane, I mean, same with you. I mean, you've been on you've like since the beginning of this movie, like has have things changed? I know you were on our show recently as well. So have things changed for you since the movie came about? I know you mentioned a little bit about that last time. If you can maybe elaborate a little bit more since the release of the movie and since I know you mentioned there's been a lot of projects. You've got the school going. Just mentioning some of that.
Sure. I mean, as mentioned in the more lengthy interview that we've done in 2016, during the filming of the movie, I had kind of taken a step back from doing a lot of comics work and stuff like that. And I mean, even at that time, I think I had already worked on the first Jewish comics anthology at that point, and we were sort of in between waiting on, I guess, updates as far as the Mark Twain book, which I also worked on. And I think at that point, we hadn't even started discussing the second volume. So that was kind of also I mentioned it was in my own personal life, there was a lot of change going on too. So I had sort of taken a step back from creative things. I was working with the conventions. Although as of 2017, I would say I started getting more back into things. And actually that's sort of around 2017, 2018, where we were working a lot on the Jewish Comics Volume 2, as well as the Mark Twain artwork. I mean, the cover was out there for a while, for a couple of years, and then we managed to get back into that, and that was a lot of fun. All the projects with AH have been a lot of fun.
Here's an image of you, Shane. This was back when you had a nice woof of hair there.
Oh yes. Oh, oh dear.
Oh dear. That was awesome.
Okay, Shane, I miss my hair too.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, it's quite interesting because I feel like the one thing it goes to show, even like I have an image here of Alfonso I like to show because he couldn't unfortunately make it onto this episode. He had some connectivity issues there, but with every individual that we had on this show, and I mean, we're looking back at Megan Carter. I believe she has a new name now because she's been married recently. We had Mike Ruth on it. He was, another great artist that was on the original film. I mean, these are artists that at the time we were studying them, but also, kind of like yourself. How do you see yourself as being a study of not only a project but of an industry and the struggles that you've had to face? Because everyone does struggle. Whether you're a filmmaker, a comic artist, an illustrator. I mean, we're going through struggles. We're going through these things, and I mean, Philip, you yourself, you're an actor, performer. I mean, in the business, I know you've seen struggles. We've all seen it. The kind of messaging that you want to put out there for people who are going through very similar things that we all go through. We'll start with Philip, maybe if you can go with that.
Oh, sure. Struggles. Oh, man, it's been like 35, 40 years now. So
it never stops, eh?
Well, yeah, most of the success is probably 1/4 of my pursuit in my career. 1/4. And that's if the brand works, and that's if I do everything correct and properly, and people like me and people like to work with me and stuff. Or else I'm just wasting 40 years of my life, right? Competition, and maybe 1% or less work in a specific genre of the industry, and for lead roles and stuff, there's even less than 1%. So it's a very, 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 very tight little tiny circle, and they keep on using the same actors and the same talent because they trust each other. And once you build trust in this industry, you sort of build a network of people that you always work with, and some people don't work.
And I mean, you've been building that with me on the show for a couple of years now, and that's been quite a ride for you to go out to these conventions, and whether it was in New York or San Diego. And I mean, Shane and Andy, or we'll maybe go back to Andy, but with regards to being part of the scene, because I notice sometimes you do certain shows, sometimes you don't do certain shows, and we always find kind of our market at a certain time that we want to really push something or kind of take a step back. How has it been for you? I mean, just in the market, pushing yourself out there, pushing your books out there, and because you've won awards as well. I know you've been. Was it part of the Globe and Mail, I think, or another newspaper that you won awards with?
Oh, the Globe, Globe and Mail, I think, was the First Nations Community Read Award.
Oh wow!
The National Post awarded us the title of the best in new graphic novels, and that goes back to 2011 when we first published our first book. So it's been, awards has been great. Mark Twain's Niagara won the gold medal.
Oh wow! Wow.
Yeah, gold medal. Well, the Jewish Comics Anthology Volume 2, so Cy and Mark Twain's Niagara won the gold and the bronze in the same year in the same category at the Independent Publisher Book Awards.
Oh, that's incredible.
And we've won a slew of others. And it's, and the accolades are great, and building on exactly what Philip had said was, when you build sort of that community and that trust, AH Comics is known for, I produce large collection books, so dozens of stories in one book, lots of artists. But yeah, I definitely fall back on, first and foremost, I have my list of who I've worked with before and the community and the small group of artists that I definitely trust and love their professionalism. But as far as the shows that we go to, I mean, that's part of the struggle that we were talking about. There's getting the brand out, but, part of it is also the business end. So I pick and choose shows based on, I'm like, how many books am I going to sell? How was it financially viable to do the show previously? And that will decide on what I do, the next year. So as much as we love to say, my first love is as an artist, but I'm also an entrepreneur and a businessman. So the decisions we make for booking shows and where I take the company, is all sort of in the back end in the business. So not the most glamorous to speak about, but that's kind of that's a driving force.
No, for sure. And Shane, I mean, I have a question for you. I mean, seeing that you've always kind of worked on perfecting the art, the form of your storytelling, like where do you see the future in this business for you, but also in the progression of the industry for years to come? Because I know I've asked you this briefly in the last interview, but I think this is just more elaborate, just to understand where the future of things are headed. And now that, like COVID, for example, I mean, this affected conventions across Canada, the U.S. I mean, San Diego Comic-Con is closing its doors this year. How do you guys see that? Like, I'll start with Shane, and then we'll move on to asking everyone else as well.
I might have a unique view on this, but my view is that less shows for the next year. In terms of from a creative development standpoint, I think it's going to be a good thing for creators to actually start focusing more on their own intellectual properties and developing their own storylines and stuff like that, because there's been such a trend, and I fell victim to this myself in the early 2010s, even before that, I'd say 2008 to 2012, a strong emphasis it shows on fan art selling over, like, especially the mainstream shows, was a lot more profitable than creating your own books. Because I got into the industry 2005 with my Dorothy Gale Journey to Oz series, and when I was just starting at shows, that's all I was selling. And then I saw other people were selling, those sell some fan art, and I'm like, is this okay? Are we allowed to? And it's like, well, apparently, the companies just sort of turned a blind eye to it. As long as you're not, mass producing crazy or trying to make toys and T-shirts and stuff within a limit. And I mean, some people have ventured into that category.
Well,
but,
I mean, it's like fandom, right? Like if you're into a specific type of character or love for something, if you're not exploiting, I think, the brand to a point where you're destroying their name, it's kind of hard for them to figure out who every person is out there that's making a piece of artwork, right?
Yeah, and in fact, actually, over the last couple of years, DC Collectibles has started a line of Artist Alley inspired statues. So they would take certain interpretations of characters and I guess license the artist, because I guess they figured, you know what, if we can't beat them, join them, because there's a sort of, you know, a PR in terms of legality. They can come after anyone they want if you're making money off of their property, but from a PR standpoint, it doesn't look good when the big corporation is going after the poor, you know, artist or whatever. So I think they figured, you know what, let's take a positive spin. And I think that that's been a good thing. But at the same time, like when I myself stopped carrying my own books at shows because like, well, the fan art is selling way better. But then I had several unproductive years of producing my own work to focus more on what's selling at shows. And then I just decided, you know what, forget it. I'm not going to do the shows anymore because it became too expensive anyway and too competitive.
Yeah.
So I just decided, all right, I'm going to take this time. I'm going to start working within the shows in the organizational side. When publishers such as AH, you know, with Andy, if they've approached me to work on a project, which great, then I know they're selling the books for me at shows and through publishers. I don't have to worry about going to the shows to do that. And it's not that I don't like selling my own books at shows. It's just hard to stand out with, you know, your own stuff when you've got the wall of prints on either side of you with Deadpool and X-Men and everything else that people know. But then you have more independent shows like Toronto Comics Arts Festival and some of the more independent shows where people are looking for unique stuff. So I would love to see more of that sort of come out of this, more focus on independent creations and properties rather than leaning into so much of the fan art and the fan.
And it feels like because of that, I know here in Toronto at least, TCAF, you know, came out when people needed that kind of show where it wasn't just about the big labels and the big Marvel and DCs, but also more of the independent artists, more of the independent work. I mean, they do cater, I noticed, and I feel like more toward children's books at times, but at other times they do include other, you know, animators, other illustrators, and some very non-traditional, you know, and mature audience type content out there as well, which I feel does get shown there. Taking my kids there, I remember I had to cover their eyes sometimes because you'd see the side boob out on an image or God knows what, or a nipple here or God knows what there. But my point is that at times, there's definitely more of that demand. I know what you mean exactly by that, Shane. You can be at Artist Alley, whether it's at Fan Expo or many other shows out there. I know in New York Comic Con I saw this, but you'll have a complete indie artist in Artist Alley, and then right behind him is like, you know, Neil Adams' daughter. So I mean, and she's got a pretty big following because she's a colorist, right? So you've got to know, you know, who's in the industry doing what. And I find it is a good way also though to mix and meet people, because you never know where you might pick up your next job from. It might be that guy that's got his booth right next to you or the one right behind you, right? So that being said, Andy, I do have a kind of another question here. You being a family man and in the comic book publishing industry, like how do you see yourself producing projects over the years? I know we touched on some of that. I had a nice image in the film where, or at least in the back end of things, where you and your son were kind of playing and. How is that? Like how old are your kids now, by the way?
Well, Asher just turned 6 3 days ago.
Oh wow!
And Lily is now 4, so she was 4 in April. And I mean that was one of the changes when we filmed that segment at my place years ago. I mean we didn't have Lily; we only had Ash.
Yeah.
Or we had Lily and she was...
No, I think you just had Lily. She was just born.
Or we just had Lily. I
there
mean,
you go.
Yeah, I mean, you asked me how it's been. I haven't slept in 6 months. So, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
The memory, it goes. along with the hair.
Yeah, you didn't lose any more hair, though. That's the good thing.
I didn't have much to lose. Anyway.
No.
It definitely affects how much work I'm able to per year. You know, part of that is because I produce the large collections. It takes it's a large chunk of time, but I mean, it's also, you know, having kids and and having a family and the responsibilities and everything that comes along with it, it limits what you're able to do, on a year-to-year basis, which is
of course
whatsoever, because I think in a way it makes me focus on what is the right project to do this year. What's going to be the most quality, hit the most people, instead of just, setting an arbitrary number and just saying, I want to do 4 books this year. I'm able to say, you know what? I got time to do one amazing piece. Which one am I going to do? And then all the planning that comes with it. So,
yeah. And one other thing, I want to kind of touch on, being part of this Canadian audience that, the film kind of portrayed from the beginning. It's interesting because the film had a very Canadian feel to it, but it also, because as much as I produced and directed the film, I didn't edit the film, and I always like to put that out there. We had an editor who worked on CBC projects. His name was Marco Libretti, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he was an editor for CBC News at the time. He was doing videos for their online department, and he really touched on the Canadian aspect, but also we did it because we did have a lot of international and American audience members. We had Stan Lee in the film, which not Andy Stanley, but Stanley. But this was a big thing for us originally, and we also had Lou Ferrigno and some other actors appear in the movie. Here's an image of us with William Shatner, another Canadian actor. One that I'm sure you, Philip, have followed over the years, right, as an actor?
Yeah. I know.
And you
somewhere, I can't remember where.
And Philip, I know that with you also, Lou Ferrigno was. I know we spoke about this recently on our last show, but he was a big, big inspiration for you to get into acting and into the comic scene with us.
He was.
Yeah, you got to meet him. So here you go. There's another image we met with Kevin Smith,
nice.
American.
And Jason Diaz.
Yeah, he was holding the Heroes stuff. We have our other executive producer who couldn't make it onto the show today, but Zavaj Zaboyan, who was on our first episode originally, guys. Alfonso's there. We were all, we got to really have a lot of the Canadian yet American market involved in this movie, and it's in one sense it kind of portrays that reality of what you mentioned, Shane. That there's a part where you can put yourself in there as a Canadian artist, as an independent artist. Canada is just wearing that badge, which I believe someone mentioned. I think Ty Templeton mentioned that in the original film, but at the end of the day, you're still in a very North American market. So back to you, Shane. How do you see? And sorry for this elaborate question here, but how do you see yourself in the large scheme of things? As an independent artist breaking out there, how do you see yourself in both the Canadian and U.S. market?
I honestly don't.
That's fair.
To answer quite simply, I mean, to quote Joker from Dark Knight, I'm the dog chasing cars. So when I get an idea for a project, I do it because it's a project that I would like to read. It's something that I would like. And I think
you do realize that you're part of it, whether you like it or not, when you go out to these shows, right?
Yeah, but from a comparative standpoint, if you're any publisher, whether it being an individual person or someone who has a publishing company, by putting a book out there, you are immediately competing with the biggest companies. You are in competition with Marvel and DC for the same dollars, because if you're charging $5, that's $5 that they want, and so on and so forth. So you're in. So in terms of how I see myself the same way as everyone else. I am part of a much larger picture, but myself as an individual, in terms of I don't think too much about what trends are happening, and that I don't have very focused group kind of thinking in my mind. Occasionally there will be a project that I'll say well, this is relevant for right now, and it's something that interests me, but that second part needs to be stronger. Like the fact that if it's something that's relevant right now, great, but if I have no connection to it whatsoever, I'm not just going to jump into something because it's trendy or because I think, well, the other companies are doing this, so I should do it too. I don't care about that. Like, if you're getting into comics, you're not doing it to make a ton of money. You're doing it out of the passion, and even Marvel and DC, for the most part, their comics are promotional vehicles for their film and TV divisions. Like they're just generating, like they're essentially loss leaders relative to what they make from that other stuff. So if you're like, and the merchandising and all that stuff, that's the money making stuff. So when I'm trying to tell a story, I'm not thinking like, oh, this is going to make me rich. I'm thinking like, oh, hey, cool. This is a story I like and I'm enjoying working on it. Maybe it can be a TV show. Maybe it can be a movie. But then you have the added pressure. If it's going to be a TV show, is it going to get canceled after one season and then the story isn't going to get finished? Or so, yeah. So there's so much there. So I say, okay, within comics, the great thing is that you can do it yourself. You can tell the story that you want to tell and no one can stop you. So that's how I see myself as a storyteller who cannot be stopped. It is all, I am my biggest strength and my biggest obstacle. So I guess that's
it's incredible. Like I straight up commend you for that, because it's like we said, it's not easy to do that out there, especially with, and that's the one thing like I noticed throughout the process of shooting the original film was that every single one of you artists were struggling, but at the same time, as much as we all see the struggle, and I've seen this as an independent filmmaker, you're still part of this amazing scene that really does commend your work. I mean, really does love it, pays you for it when they do pay you for it. And yeah, which is it takes a bit of time to get that figured out. But I mean, if you've come with that business savviness to try and sell yourself, which I've seen you both do. I've seen you do that as well, Philip, with us at the conventions, because you've been with us at the Hamilton shows. You've been with us at many of the booths that I've personally had. It's interesting because I've now, since I started the movie, I was drawing for fun. I never really took it to a point that I was interested. Now I'm doing sketch covers, again, because I want to get better at it. And in the last 3-4 years, I've taken some classes with Ty Templeton. I've taken a little bit more seriously. I feel like my art's improved, but I mean, I'm trying to focus on one specific thing. Whereas I see you guys, it's this constant evolution that's happening, and you're constantly evolving into that next step. And you're involved in an industry, in a market that's just really, it's out there, and you're taking a market share of Marvel and DC, just like you mentioned, Shane. Which, to me, I mean, I find refreshing, because it's like you said, if you can take a buck from them, why not? Like, if you can take a buck from either the big two or Image or any of these other major independent labels like Dynamite, Dark Horse. I mean, because we always look at the big two. They're so big that it's just insane at this point. And if you can take that, it's awesome. Now, one other kind of question I had also for you, Andy. I want to kind of take it back to you, but and Shane as well. Actually, we'll get into both of your experiences with this. But since the movie's premiere, I mean, like, if you can share a little bit about your experiences with the premieres, with how that was as an experience watching your film out there with an amazing audience. Andy, this was an image of you there in the middle, right next to me at the Oakville Film Festival that we showed the film at. We screened it. We had about 50 or 60 people at that screening, I remember, at the time, and we had a number of screenings. How was that as an experience for you?
Oh, as an experience, it was wonderful. Watching the film, it's always and I don't know, Philip, is that something that you ever get used to, just seeing yourself on screen? I don't know if I could ever be an actor, because
Yeah, Philip, why don't you answer that for us?
Well, I think, like, listening to you guys, I think what gets you up in the morning and do what you love to do has to be specific. And there has to be immediate gratification and long-term gratification. And, of course, the money. I think you guys have to realize that there's a lot of young kids, and that's really why I got into this sort of genre of filming. Because I see a lot of great young artists, and they're staying away from trouble and they're following their passions, and it just makes me so excited to wake up and do the shows and meet these people. I want to meet them, and you're not going to meet them anywhere but these shows that we do. And you have the immediate gratification where you do what you love to do. Then hopefully you can make some money at it, so you can do more of it in a bigger way and be part of the responsibility of the whole movement. And then you have your role model. People look up to you. They say, I want to be like Shane. I want to be like Andy. I want to be like Gerard. I want to be like Philip Moran. And they follow you and they become your fans. And you have a big responsibility on your shoulders. Forget about the money. Forget about the, all the other stuff. You're a role model. And you're keeping them safe, and you're keeping them motivated. You're keeping them, and you're growing this aspect of the industry with young kids and artists, and you're keeping the culture alive. So I think that's important. That's important. Having something like that, those three things that sort of get you up and do what you love to do, time and time again. Even if the money's not there, you have something else, and if that's not there, you have the other thing, right? So it's important like that.
And Shane, actually, the question I have for you as well. I mean, because it just based on what Philip was mentioning, for you to build your audience, like, do you notice a big difference from where you were when we were doing the movie to now, where your audience is? Like, just on your own, whether it came from the movie or not, do you see kind of a progression of building your audience, whether it's on social media or out at shows or in other forms?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, at the time the film was being made, I was very inactive.
Yeah.
So it would be hard to isolate specifically whether the film had a specific influence, because of the fact that, like, for several months after the film was released, I still wasn't really. I think actually when I did the poster for the film, that, and I was also working on Hogtown Horror at the time.
Yeah, the one that's right there.
That one there. So I wasn't really doing much work. I wasn't staying current. I was sort of like hidden away, really.
Yeah.
So when I started later in, or I'd say early 2017, I was starting work at Shopify. Because at that point I was sort of in this mindset where it's like, okay, gone through some personal traumas in my life, and I felt that the creativity was gone. So I said, okay, I gotta, to meet other needs in my life, I've got to get that 9 to 5. And I did it for a month and I hated it. Shopify is an amazing company. It just was not a good fit for me. So for me, it was like, at that point, jumping back into things, getting back into the creative, getting into animation development, really jumping into the AH projects that we've talked about a lot. That's made the difference, is like staying active and stuff. In terms of tracking the responses, I mean, I think a lot of it too is that the algorithms on Instagram have changed a lot between then and now too, because I even find, like, when I posted artwork then, I would get like 40, 50 likes and then a bunch of new followers. But nowadays, like, I'll do it and I'll lose followers, it seems sometimes.
And that happens to everyone. But you also, Shane, the one thing, like, you've had an audience, and a very educational audience for many years, teaching at with a lot of the school boards and a lot of the different schools that you've been at, and having your own school soon. But I've noticed that that's kind of been a niche for you that you've carved out, separate of what we did with Heroes. How's that been for you? I mean, has the audience grown? Have you seen a progression there as well over the years? Because I know you've done tons of classes, right?
Yeah, I mean, there have been people who have contacted me saying they saw me in the film, and maybe, because I mentioned that I did teaching, so I might have got some more, school bookings and things like that from there in the aftermath. But as we discussed in the previous episode, my own school is set to open as soon as I'm allowed to. And I'm excited about that because, as Philip mentioned, with the role model aspect of it, like, I take that extremely seriously as well. So, I mean, whenever, even with regards to posting my own work, I have certain rules. Like, I have a set of standards in terms of which kind of work that I will accept. And going beyond what I said earlier about it being interesting to me, it also needs to reflect the values that I want to share with others, especially those that I'm teaching who may be, concerned with those things, particularly with parents and stuff. So try to avoid anything with like, drug involvement, anything that sort of promotes violence or certain hate acts and stuff like that. Even Andy will tell you, without going into too much specifics, like when we first met, I was very specific about the contract terms to make sure that nothing like that would come into place, because we didn't know each other then. So we went back and forth on that. Not that it was ever an issue, but I'm very much concerned about the work that I'm putting my name on.
Yeah,
I want to make
your
sure
image
that
at the end of the day, right? It's your image. You want to make sure it's portrayed correctly, and there's no negative connotations that are contributing to who you are as an artist, an individual, and as your brand, right?
Exactly, and even going so far as when negotiating other contracts and things, to say like, okay, if this is ever reprinted, you have to tell me. I need to approve the context for which it is going to be reprinted. I need to make sure that you're not taking the existing work and reframing it,
of course,
in a way that could reflect not just poorly on me, but the material itself. Because again, these are things that I want to be able to proudly, show other people and students and others as well. So I mean, for me, as far as the kind of fans that I want, and again, like just to go back to the fandom thing, I'm wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, so I don't want to seem, I got like,
it's okay. I'm wearing my Wolverine t-shirt.
Yeah,
but,
I have nothing against the big two, Marvel and DC. If it's a good story, I want to read it. I just have no interest in working on it, because I feel like, I like to enjoy that stuff as a fan, but I want to tell my own story. So it's nothing against fandom. Like, I'm surrounded by it, but for me, the fans that I want, numbers matter less to me than the fact that people can look at my stuff and enjoy it and genuinely get something out of it. So that's what if someone will, like, if I get 2 people telling me that they really enjoyed a book that I did, that's good enough for me. Like, I don't need thousands of likes or whatever else without any comments. I like to dialogue with people about what they got out of the book. It's so it's great in that sense.
And yeah, I mean, I kind of want to reframe that same question kind of over to Andy. Andy, with you and your audience with AH Altered History Comics, right? That's the name of it all. You started. Was your first book, was that Titans?
That was Titan.
Yeah.
Titan and Alternate History is the full title. Yeah.
Yeah, and Titan as a book, I mean, that was like, I remember when I saw it, I was like, I gotta buy this. Like, I was the first purchase I had with you, and I absolutely loved it. Still have my copy till today. It's incredible. And you building your audience from that point onwards. I mean, because that's prior to the movie coming out. That's prior to us even shooting anything. I mean, that book's been around since when now?
Since 2011 it came out.
2011. Wow. So I mean, yeah, amen. That's amazing. That's that like you've flourished with that as well. How has the audience been? I mean, you've had to develop an audience over the years as an artist, and I know that some of that came from the Aboriginal community with Moonshot, and that's just incredible. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's always kind of been the unintentional plan. I mean, we called the company Alternate History Comics based on the book title, Titan and Alternate History. But myself, I have a minor degree in art history and archaeology, so that's like always been a passion of mine.
Wow. Yeah, I never actually knew that about you.
Oh, hey, you learn something every day. That's why we do what we do right here.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, the opportunities that would come up that, and this kind of goes back to my earlier comment about, kind of picking and choosing what projects that I'll produce that year over others. So I like looking at stuff that is historical or cultural or community based. So, I mean, that's really led, the Jewish Comics Anthology, the Indigenous Comics Collection, and even going back to my own Hobson's Gate series, which I wrote and illustrated. I mean, that was based on, experiences with anxiety disorder and mental health challenges. So
wow.
Donate proceeds from those sales of the books to mental health charities in Canada. So that's, and so everything that AH Comics does has that community cultural feel and identity to it.
No, it's amazing. And I mean, one thing I'm going to show this image here. We had Stan Lee in the movie, but you also had Stan Lee in
the first. Yeah, we in the first volume of the Jewish Comics Anthology, there is a story that Stan Lee had written and edited, years past, and so we were able to communicate with Stan and get his blessing to read that story in the first volume of the book. So
that's amazing. I mean, the fact that you were able to do that, not many people, can have had that ability to do that. I mean, now that he's no longer with us, he was an amazing individual. And I mean, that's what I wanted to show also, some of the people here is that as much as Shane, you're mentioning, there's a lot of, you're interested in the independent storytelling in your version of telling the story versus, you definitely enjoy the fandom of the Marvel DC stuff, but you love to create your own. And you do that same thing that Shane's doing technically, but then you're also getting some major industry members from the Marvel DC world, like Stan Lee, who was involved in your own earlier projects, which is just incredible. And I mean, you've worked also with Ty Templeton. I may have shown him earlier. But Ty was in the
man.
That's his comic book boot camp, is his school as well. And I know, Shane, you've worked with Ty before. I mean, we've all kind of worked with him at one point or another. But how is that for you? I mean, to see that you're working with indie artists like Shane, and then you're working with other guys who are producing for Marvel and DC. I mean, you're kind of in the mix of it all, right?
Yeah, I'm the glue that holds everybody together.
It's all you, Andy. It's all you.
It's all me. It's all me. Yeah.
So how do you see that? Yeah, working between someone who's been producing comics since then. I mean, Stanley's been doing it for decades upon decades, versus some of us, and we're not newcomers, but when we first started, we were, right?
We were. It's part of it is just, I mean, if you want to get to the micro of it, it's an honor to be able to get permission to work with, communicate, and even become, friends and colleagues of some of these people that I looked up to, ever since I was, in high school and beyond. And then you get a little bit of an understanding that it's not, sometimes, the creators themselves, I mean, when some people think Stan Lee, they think, oh, Marvel Comics. But you know what? Stan Lee is also a human being, and he was a wonderful gentleman.
Yeah.
And he was very kind and very supportive of fans and independent creators. And I mean, that's what led us to getting to know him and to work with him in the way that I did. And even if it was just that one time, it was just a great insight to how he was. And and I mean, I could name drop some other people that are big in the industry that I work with that I won't, but you understand that it's the whole industry, whether it's Canada, whether it's the US. I mean, if you're an artist, you're a writer, you're a creator. We're all creators.
We're all in this together. Yeah, literally.
Exactly. I mean, Shane, he may not have the name recognition as Jim Lee, but Shane is just as talented and creative, and with all the other people that I've worked with. So
no, and not Shane, we're not trying to downplay you in any way.
No. I meant that I'm flattered. I'm flattered at the having my name comparatively in a sentence with Jim Lee is
or Stanley.
I can't top that.
Leads, right?
Or Stan Lee, yeah.
Yeah,
it's true. And it's the one thing I always notice every convention I've been to, and I've been to a ton now. Philip, you can attest to that. Shane, you can. Andy, you can. You've seen me at most of these. I mean, and now with this new show, which I'm going to go into shortly with you, Philip, as well. You literally, and Philip, I kind of want to get into this line of questioning with you. You see how the community is in these conventions. You really see how artists that are breaking in trying to break in. I mean, our slogan for the original movie was comics breaking conventions, and I feel like we're always doing that. We're not just in the literal and figurative, but in every sense possible. We're constantly breaking the conventions in the scene. We're constantly moving it. We're moving it forward. Whether we're independent, whether we're part of a big label, whether we're part of a few labels. I mean, I've had guys on this live show that have worked for Archie Comics. They work for Chapter House, and then they produce their own, independent work. And a lot of artists do that. And I feel like the industry really commends artists for doing that, for trying to be involved on all sorts of different levels. It feels more like a family than any business that I've been involved with. Which, I mean, Philip, if you can say some words also about being involved with the show and how you've seen that on this upcoming series that's coming in July.
So, feeling like there's a family sort of environment. Every show, as I said before, is the same inside. Everybody works together. They support each other. They learn from each other. They give. They don't even care about the receiving part when they're there. They really just give themselves. They give you their time, which is so precious. Some of them travel from around the world. And outside, when you go outside, you have the people that are in that city, and the attitude, and the way the whole city works. Like in I often say Niagara Falls. When you go to Niagara Falls, it seems to be a really nice, relaxing environment. People are nice. People are Hamilton's nice too. You don't feel the pressure of having to be more than what you are. You can be yourself. You can see people. They're all sort of just relaxed, and they're enjoying. They're walking around, and they're becoming part of the scene. Some places you go are much more hyperactive, some much more competitive, much more,
but also like
they don't see
Philip,
what they feel.
So, Phil, specifically, like with regards to the artists, do you notice the community between the artists? Do you notice also, because you interviewed a lot of these artists, going out to whether it was the Canadian shows or the U.S. shows? How do you feel the community is? Are they different in different shows, or would you say that the community still is very similar, whether it's in Canada or the U.S.?
No, the artists, they travel. They travel to different places, different Comic Cons, the U.S. or Canada. So these people, you see them at the same, at different Comic Cons, the same people at different Comic Cons. So basically, they're not changing the way they act or think or work together. But like I said, outside is where it all changes. The demographics change and the scenery changes. Like Comic-Con, obviously in San Diego, the whole city comes alive. Some places, they don't even know that there's a convention going on. I know there's in Toronto, there's always a convention going on. So some sort of convention regarding Comic-Con or something. So people are sort of immune to it. They just walk around. They don't know what's really happening inside. But Comic-Con, in San Diego, the whole city comes alive. They know what's happening. The restaurants, the stores, the hotels, right? The convention, behind the conventions, people on the water, off the water, all kinds of stuff. So, and that's definitely the biggest Comic-Con that we've experienced, and the 50th anniversary. But inside, everybody sort of supports each other, works together, is there to learn. It has an agenda as well. They definitely have an agenda, not like homework, but they have an agenda to meet somebody specific, to work with somebody specific, to buy some of their artwork, or the toys, and I know you love toys, and stuff like that, or to learn about the industry. Like me, for instance, I first watched the video, Heroes Manufactured, the one you gave me. Then at these conventions, I learned, face to face how it all was, and the celebrities, Michael Rooker, Lou Ferrigno, which after 40 years, I got to meet one of my my mentor that got me sort of thinking in the creative direction that I think in.
Yeah, this guy right here, right?
Yeah. We met him in Miami, and it was amazing.
He was awesome. He was awesome.
Someone that got me on my path. I was alive. He was alive. He was well. I was well. We were in the same vocation. We were in the same sort of industry. I also worked out when I was young. I was a bodybuilder as well. I didn't take it into as far as that. I just sort of used it just to as a tool to get me, through hard times and stuff. You gotta always have something, like I was saying before, have something that gets you up, puts 2 feet on the ground, and you love doing what you're doing, and there's a bigger purpose at hand. So
yeah. And Shane, I have a quick question for Shane here, though, which Philip, you kind of brought into light. But
thank you.
I guess you being involved with conventions also over the years, and you've had booths, and you've been part of booths, and whether it was your own personal booth, which I've seen you have many times, or whether it was with Andy here, and with others, and working the scene, you notice that fan aspect of you comes out as well, right? Like I've seen you being the fanboy, yet also being the artist, and I've seen that with other, whether they're artists just breaking in or artists who have been doing it, like Humberto Ramos. One of his lines in our new show is, "I'm the fanboy who gets to make a living off of this." Which, do you guys feel that? Shane, if you can kind of speak to that.
What's the question?
So the question is, can you say that do you see yourself as the fanboy, and if so, how do you see yourself that way?
Oh, I mean, when I'm working shows, a lot of times, as Philip mentioned, there's so many people who you see from show to show, so that's cool. Like, and it's nice to catch up with. So there's some creators who I'll see at Fan Expo like last year, and then I'll see them again this year, and they'll be living in the States or even another country, and I'll get to like talk to them on a more personal level, which is cool. So I get in that regard, like it's a more unique fan experience to sort of catch up with people in that way, because a lot of times you can add them on social media after, like some, not just comic artists and stuff, but some voice actors and celebrities. Like there's one Ron Rubin, who is the voice of Morph on X-Men. He's a close personal friend of mine, and I actually and I met him in the most random place when I used to own my toy store in downtown Toronto. He came into the store looking for a Morph figure and saying like, well, I was that character. I'm like, oh really? And I ended up finding him one like years later at a different convention. Like I walked around, but no, what I love about that scene, I definitely fanboy out a lot of times. Like if it's a show that I'm working, I have to be very cautious, because again, like as a guest liaison, I have to take care of everyone's needs. So I have to have that big picture thinking. And I always tell people, like, look, if I only say hi to you for a second and run away, it's not personal. It's just because I'm being pulled in.
Professionalism, Shane. Like I have to say that I've seen you at these shows present some very, very, big celebrities, very big celebrity artists, which, you've had to kind of take yourself away from that aspect of being a fanboy at times when the role calls for you to be a professional for that moment, right?
Yeah, and I've had the opposite experience too, where there's a big, I told you about this, I'm not going to mention names, where there is a big artist or creator who works on a character that I don't really like, but it's nothing against the creator, but they're brought in because there's a new movie or something featuring that character, and then I get assigned to, oh, can you bring him to the panel? And I'm like, oh crap, I hope he doesn't ask me about the character, because I have a filter problem. I don't want to lie, so I just I want to talk about everything. But so there's the opposite effect. But yeah, there's definitely times where if someone from TMNT, for instance, gets brought into the show, I could stand at the table and talk to them for like 45 minutes, because that's like my childhood. But then I'm like, I'm supposed to be working. I'm so sorry, and I have to walk away and get a little something. But it's hard to find that balance. But definitely, you have to. And I got to meet Jim Lee in the green room at Fan Expo because I knew that I wouldn't get to otherwise. And it was the same with Todd McFarlane. I had to ask another staff member to let me just cut in line for a second just to shake his hand, because I wouldn't have time because Todd McFarlane taught the guy who taught me a lot of my comic art stuff. So it was sort of a full circle thing, getting to meet him and talk about. So yeah, there's definitely instances where I forget, oh, I'm working or I'm supposed to be running the show or whatever. And I go over there and I'm like, I am definitely a fan right now, and all that other stuff is going out the window, and people are getting annoyed at me because they want to get their photo op or whatever, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm going now. Carry on.
For sure. And you know what? That will kind of bring me into like our last. Thanks for sharing that, Shane. I'll bring us to a last kind of line of questioning. I do have some stuff here for Philip also with regards to the new show that's coming out. So I mean, this is kind of the evolution of Heroes Manufactured, guys, and everyone out there watching. First off, I do want to mention, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We do have the Heroes Manufactured Live YouTube channel. Just having blunders here, tongue twisters, as they say.
That's okay.
Yeah, definitely check it out. And Philip, share with us a little bit about your experience with this new show, where it's going to be taken. How you want to see things kind of happen moving forward, and how we all kind of want to see things. Because I was talking to Alfonso earlier. We're looking to maybe produce a sequel to the original movie down the road. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But that's something that I'd like to personally touch on, see where everyone's careers are now, and kind of a rehash at everything. But where do you want to see, Philip, the future of Heroes Manufactured with the new show coming out? With the brand, how do you see that? And share a little bit about what we did with the new show, if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, we had this because of that show.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that we have a coronavirus, so we made lemonades out of lemon instead of throwing lemons out because we wanted something sweet. But it was the new show was something that I was not really. I didn't have any experience in as a traveling host, as a in very busy conventions like that. So the fact that these the artists, the illustrators, the cosplayers, all the people at the conventions were friendly, really made it easy for us to walk around and film and talk to people. They were always willing to talk to us if they weren't busy selling something. Because obviously the first priority was to their fans. You know, if they want to take a picture, they want to buy something, that's why they were there. And then we just waited on the side until they had time for us and they were ready, they were excited, and they calmed down, that kind of stuff. It's just, again, all the artists that you don't know about that are sort of very independent, trying to break through in all different aspects of the industry, whether it's creating a toy, creating an apron, a comic book, a character, their own touch to things, twist to things. It was just great to see that kind of talent and expose that kind of talent through our shows. Because that's probably their way in, is for people to get to see them through our shows and through our traveling, all the expenses and all the hardships we went through. It was for them. It was to help people to shine.
For sure. And Philip, the one thing I wanted to kind of also see, I mean, you being part of, like, because you started with a lot of the shows that Shane and Andy are here involved with in Canada. And Shane and Andy, I'm not sure if you guys have been to any of the U.S. shows. Have any of you guys done like some of the bigger ones too, like the New York Comic Cons or San Diego or any of that stuff?
Chicago,
Miami was good.
Yeah. So Shane, you did Chicago? Is it the C2E2 or?
No, I did Wizard World Chicago in 2011 through 2013.
Okay.
So that would be the biggest U.S. show that I've done personally.
Nice.
But
Wizard World's huge. I mean, they've been around for years.
They were, yeah.
And how about you, Andy? Have you done any U.S. space shows?
No, not personally. I've had creators who would represent some of the AH books at the bigger shows. San Diego Comic-Con awarded, Moonshot with an award, but I personally wasn't able to go. So
No, but I mean, you're still involved with them
No,
on
we're
some
there.
level. I mean, that's amazing because what we do in this show, and I mean, Philip, if you can a little bit just explain kind of your experience, but we started the show off in Canada. We because we're Canadian, we're not ignoring that. We wear our badge, and our flag proud. But at the same time, we're not ignorant to the fact that we're just north of the U.S., which is the next big industry, and we're quite heavily involved with them, right? I mean, a lot like Andrew Thomas, who I'm sure you guys both know. He's done work for Archie Comics. I know Ty Templeton's done stuff, as we mentioned, for DC and Marvel. I mean, a lot of these big labels, these big U.S. franchises and U.S. Sorry, not franchises, but content providers. We're involved with them. So, Philip, how do you see yourself going through that experience from the Canadian market over to the American market? If you can share a little bit about the cities and what you've done there.
Well, first of all, watching your movie sort of got me into what it was all about with some people that are on that video. And then watching all the other stuff on Comic-Cons and the TV shows, and you see Neil Adams constantly talking. You see Stan Lee in there constantly talking. You see the main characters that really started all this. And then you see the Ninja Turtles breakdown and all that other stuff, how it became a movie. And as an actor, it's very fascinating to see that what I thought was really what really is. A lot of stuff I feel now, I started from the illustrators of the comic books. Without them, we wouldn't have these big movies and these big movements in characters too. As I always said, these characters are lifelike now. You can watch a film with human people and then watch a cartoon now or a comic series. And there's emotions, there's downfalls, there's suffering, they die, they bleed, they get married, they have babies. It's incredible. You can, and there's a lot of great morality built into the show. It's not just for kids; it's also for adults now too.
Do you feel there was a big difference for you from seeing some of these characters, these movements, in comparison to the Canadian market versus the U.S. market? Do you see the difference in the cities? Like how do you interpret that differently as a someone who hosted and interviewed a lot of these artists in different cities?
Was there a difference from city to city, country to country?
City to city, people to people, a little bit of the fandom, from one.
Toronto's just a young artistic world right now still. Even though there's so much work coming into this city, it comes from the States. It comes from everywhere else but Toronto. It loves it when it's here. It supports it, but when it's not here, it doesn't create it. So if we didn't have it coming from the States, coming from everywhere else, I think it wouldn't be big here in Toronto, whether it's movies or the.
I beg to differ, but I think just because we've seen artists like Shane and Andy and other independent artists that really push it out there, but I mean. It's fair. I mean, I do understand where you're coming from.
But the States is much more active when it comes to
the mainstream scene, probably. Yeah,
art for sure. Like New York is definitely incredible when it comes to art.
And Shane, you feel like you want to say something?
I agree. Particularly when I first got started, it's gotten better over the years. But when I was walking, and this is before there was any crowdfunding or anything, back in 2004, when I was trying to sell my first book, I was going to countless comic shops in Toronto. I had my MapQuest stapled sheets together, walking around the city, and I think it was like -15 outside, going store to store, just trying to pitch them my book. And it's like Philip said, a lot of them sadly had the attitude that when it's big in the States, let us know and we'll take an interest in it.
Oh my God,
However, in recent years, there are stores, and I'll say like Gotham Central is a great example, who have gone to extreme measures to promote Canadian content by creating things like variants, that are here, like things that are fairly new, but it is becoming a lot more supportive in that way. But I will agree with the general statement that even amongst fans, and I think it's not just within comics, but anything, where Canadians tend to take pride in things when it's recognized everywhere else first, and that's kind of sad. Where it's just like
when they're making more money than they're actually putting into it, they're very safe. Very safe, I find. They invest in real estate, which is a very safe investment. But the arts is not a safe investment. I mean, they don't know if it's going to tank or it's going to make money, and they don't have a lot of money they put into the arts.
No, for sure, for sure.
But I mean, I belong to both unions as an actor, Canadian and American, and as you're on and I talk about constantly with the unions, they're not responsible to get you work. They're not responsible to get you an agent. They're not responsible to support you in any way. It's tough because there's more work in the States than there is in Canada. So eventually what happens is you work more in the States and then Canadians lose every big artist again, because they didn't believe in that artist when he was in Canada or Toronto, and they didn't support that artist. So basically, I mean, the right thing to do, the money's better, the opportunities are bigger, but that's what I find a lot of people in Canada want to do. They want to get into the big markets, which are in the States. And then maybe when they get a little older, they may want to come back to Canada. But that's their choice. But it's not because of success, because they want to come back to the roots or something. It's not an easy journey when you love the place you live in, but it doesn't support what you do as much as the States. Hopefully now with coronavirus and stuff like that, people are going to say, you know what, we have to take care of our people and everything they do and everything they work towards in our own countries. This is what it's all about right now. The States can't help. China can't help. Europe can't help. We can't travel and we can't do our shows everywhere. But in Canada, we all got to support each other. And although we're not doctors of medicine, we're doctors of spirits. Basically, we lift people's spirits up. We support their dreams, their fantasies. So we're actually, in a way, doctors of spirits. We're not doctors of medicine, but we save people's lives through our craft.
No, that's fair. Now, okay, guys. Well, listen. I think we ran out of we went way over we normally go, but
okay, we're over.
I do want to say again, thank you guys all for coming out and being part of this mini reunion, and also part of what we're going to be a part of soon, which is the new Heroes Manufactured Creators Unleashed show, and a lot more episodes on Heroes Manufactured Live. Appreciate you guys coming out. Thanks again, everyone, and look forward to seeing you guys soon. If anyone wants to say anything before we go, is there any other comments, guys?
Let's all work together soon again.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Do that.
Let's keep doing. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, again, thank you all. I appreciate you guys coming out today. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and look forward to seeing you guys on our next episode. And definitely check out our new series that's coming out soon, which is Heroes Manufactured Creators Unleashed. We're looking right now at July with Amazon Prime. Most likely it will be released there. Thanks, guys. Take care, guys.
Awesome.
Take care. Thank you.
Have a great day, guys.
Bye.
Bye.